So now you can see that I've slipped the wires together here, and they're actually touching the side of the jump ring. Now the first thing I'll do is I'll solder this joint, and then I'll shift down and I'll solder these 2 points one at a time. So you can see I've got my solder right up on top. Gently dry out the flux. And we want to keep the flame pretty much on the end. Yep. Now I've got one piece of solder down here on the side. I just flowed that. I'll have to quench it and turn it around to get the other side. Now, when you get your jump ring soldered at all 4 points on your claws, you need to file your little grooves in the second jump ring, slide it into place. Now, check these to make sure that they're lined up nicely, north, south, east, west. And if they're not, tweak them a little bit at this time. You want this all sorted before you solder your second ring in, because once you solder that in, you're stuck. Once again, hold your jump ring in your parallel jaw pliers and at a slight angle. Make your marks. Try to make sure that they're north, south, east, west. You can mark these with a texture. And now place the jump ring with your tweezers. I think you'll find it easier. Or with your chain nose pliers. And you make sure the groove goes down. Now, at this time, you need to adjust the gap between the jump rings, and you need to make sure it's level. Now, if you want this higher, what you can do is you can squeeze your claws in a little bit to make it a little bit higher. But we just want to make sure that it's absolutely parallel with the first one. Now you can see I'm holding it fairly far away from where I'm going to be soldering. And just a little touch of flux on each point. It should be pretty stable at this point. And what I do is I normally do 2 claws at a time. You could set the whole thing up, but I find it easier to just focus on 2. I mean, I focus on 1, I do the second one, then I'll shift over and do this other setup. Always place your solder with your flux brush. And if you have one claw that isn't touching at this point, don't worry about it. Solder the ones that are touching, and then we'll adjust that one so it touches, and we'll do that at the end. So neutral flame, and I just gently warm it up. The flux will dry out. And you really need to pay attention to where your flame is pointed, because oftentimes the claws on the opposite side will melt while you're trying to do your soldering on this side. So you can always shift your flame around so that it's exactly where you want it. So these 2 flowed. Now I'm going to quench it and flow the other 2. I have one claw that's not quite touching, so I'll just adjust that using my chain nose pliers, and then we're ready to solder the last 2. You can see my flame is really just on the spot where I want to solder. The flux goes clear, the solder will flow. Done. Quench it, pickle it. Take the piece out of the pickle and have a close look at your solder joins. You should be able to see the curve of the meniscus at each join everywhere. If you can't, go back and solder it again. Now I have a 5mm round ball burr. I'm going to put a little bit of wax on. And we're going to just run that in on the seat. You don't have to go very far in, but we want it so that it basically matches the bottom of the stone. Now we're going to drop the stone in. And so you can see the stone is sitting in there. Now at this point, what I'm going to do is just rest my side cutters on the top of the stone, and I want to make sure that they're level. So that way, when I cut, I have plenty of claws sticking up to push over the stone later. So do all four. Just make sure that the stone is nice and level, because it will move around at this point. You don't want to cut any of the claws short. So this is roughly set up to the correct depth for the claws. Now we'll leave this at this point. Hold this in our parallel jaw pliers, and I hold it close to the bottom jump ring, and we're going to saw that off. Yeah, so all four of them. And then what I do is I hold it with my flat round pliers and file the bottom. Now at this point, this is ready to either solder onto a ring, solder a post on the back, or an ear wire. So this is the setting. Your basket setting. It's a nice little setting, but it really is fiddly. And you could do the same thing with an oval stone. You just make the wire so that it fits directly under the girdle of the stone. You don't want to see the wire above the stone, because you don't want to take away from the stone. So this is just so that you can really show the stone off. Now we'll get to setting this later on, but this is just about making your basket. So this is what we're making. A simple little basket setting, in this case for a 5mm stone.